Even the smallest critters can be fascinating. Silverfish are living proof of this. In this video, I will be giving a general overview of the animal and my interpretation of how they could function. Silverfish are small, relatively speaking, arthropods, usually found underground, hiding in stone. However, beyond these facts, little is known about their internal biology, leaving much to the imagination. Starting off, let's look at how they could internally function. It's fairly common knowledge that scaling up small invertebrates is impractical. If we assume that Minecraft's reality is the same as our own, unless stated otherwise, then the two biggest problems we run into are the durability of the exoskeleton and lack of oxygen. Generally, making a small animal bigger results in a litany of issues, as their body structure simply is not meant to function at that size. Combining this with the fact that real-life silverfish are much smaller than their Minecraft counterparts, we can assume that these two variants have wildly differing biologies. The exoskeleton can be explained away by taking a look at reality. Animals can grow to be around the silverfish's range and bigger, so if a horse can exist without collapsing, it's not possible for these creatures to as well. The issue of breathing is a little harder to explain. Firstly, breathing's primary function is the intake of useful gases and the disposal of harmful waste. Bugs breathe through holes in their abdomen called spiracles. The biggest problem with this system as far as size goes is the fact that there's not really an internal system that distributes air through their body. As a result, they rely on oxygen diffusing by itself. In a smaller creature, this isn't a problem, since there's not a lot of places for the air to go. But scale up this system and suddenly it takes too long for the air to spread out. Not to mention that the cells that the air first reaches will gobble up all the oxygen. As a result, the remaining ones will choke. One way bigger creatures circumvent this problem is with some sort of pump, like a heart, that gets oxygen to more places quicker. On top of this, bigger animals often have the ability to forcefully draw in air. So, in order for a silverfish to be this big, their internal structure would more closely resemble something like a mouse or lizard, rather than their real-life counterparts. Now we need to explain how such a creature sustains itself, keeping in mind where it lives. Caves aren't known for their habitability, with lack of food being the main limiting factor, but they're not completely devoid of nutrition. In the world of Minecraft, spawners exist. These magical devices create a litany of creatures seemingly out of thin air, which wander throughout the underground networks. Eventually they will meet their end, and their corpses can be consumed by decomposers and scavengers. Other possible sources of food may include cobwebs, being made of amino acids and proteins, wood planks, provided silverfish have the hardware necessary to digest cellulose, skulk, and even feces. This is one of the major food sources in our world's caves. However, even with these resources, sustenance would still be relatively hard to find. Therefore, a way to store excess energy for later as well as a more efficient nutrient absorption plan would be very useful. Fat is a common way animals in our world store energy, including cave creatures and insects. As for a more efficient nutrient absorption plan, simply extending the small intestines could improve efficiency many times. More nutrients can be absorbed before the food is pooped out. The extra space a larger organ would normally take can be mostly mitigated by wrapping the intestines around themselves. Another challenge caves pose revolves around navigation. Underground areas are usually very dark, and many creatures at least partially rely on sight. However, not all do. I believe silverfish use the hairs on their body in order to sense vibrations, both from potential food and danger. Yet silverfish still seem to have fairly developed eyes. This suggests that at some point in their evolutionary history, silverfish were surface-dwelling animals, or at least somewhere with a lot of light. The reason they still have these organs may simply be that they never negatively affected the species' chances of success enough to be bred out. The hardest thing to explain is their ability to burrow into stone, mostly because there is no parallel between this ability and any real creature to my knowledge. The closest thing I can think of are limpets, which use their teeth to scrape food off rocks and in the process chip off and ingest small pieces of said rock. Trying to explain the silverfish's signature ability in a biologically possible way will require a bit of imagination. It's important to note that this is my best attempt at making a working, realistic silverfish. And since I'm far from a studied professional, this means that I might make fairly big errors regarding how living beings function. Firstly, we need to talk about how such a creature could damage stone. I proposed that Silverfish would use a pair of diamond-tipped mandibles, which would clamp together incredibly fast, essentially cracking a piece of rock off. Then the silverfish would swallow said piece and transfer it through a straight tube and expel it. Due to how the width of the silverfish's body is significantly bigger than the width of its mouth, they would have to compress themselves in order to squeeze into the cramped hole they dug. And seeing how real insects can compress, I'd say this is fairly plausible. Now we need to explain the properties of the silverfish infested stone. Firstly, there's no hole. If this did have a living creature burrow into it, surely there would be an entrance somewhere, right? Well, the best explanation I can think of is also the simplest. They block off the entrance. But that leaves us with one last question regarding burrows. What purpose do they serve? Animals create burrows for all sorts of reasons: habitation, raising young, and as a food larder. I do not believe it is for food storage, as there wouldn't be enough room for it, and there would be no way of preventing other silverfish from stealing. Quite a big problem, seeing as they are often found in groups. However, there is a credible reason they would need to burrow in order to defend themselves. Spiders, and more rarely slimes, could eat them if they catch them in the open. Although even then, it's not completely hopeless, as if one silverfish is attacked, nearby silverfish will awaken and help fend off the threat. Since they can apparently spend quite a long time in their burrows, air might become an issue. A few ways to lessen this would be the use of storage sacks, increased hemocyanin, and slowing down metabolism. One last property of silverfish stones is their lack of durability. This can be easily explained as the stone having a hole in it. Plus, if it's used repeatedly, this might further weaken it. Now we must talk about something all species need in order to continue: reproduction. Starting off, silverfish probably lay eggs in their rotten flesh, which is strewn across the caves. Not only does egg laying remove pressure from their mother, by not forcing her to feed multiple beings at the same time, it also makes it more likely for the second generation to exist. After all, if a parent carrying young dies, the young also dies, but eggs can survive without their creator. When the babies hatch, probably shortly after being laid, they will eat their birthing grounds as expected. But other creatures might also want to eat the meat and therefore swallow the baby silverfish. For this reason, it would be advantageous for the eggs and babies to have resistances to the varying threats that digestive systems generally pose. Quite possible due to the numerous organisms in our world that do similar things. And once pooped out, they can resume their feasting. Thank you for watching this video, and remember, this was just my interpretation of how silverfish function. I would like it a lot if you would leave your interpretation, so we may compare and maybe even discuss our various ideas. Organ Candy, out.